Good evening, and we're going to start our Bibles time. If you'd like to get your Bibles and turn to Hebrews chapter 11, that's where we're going to begin. And we know that we have spent a long time on Hebrews 11. We did an entire study on just that chapter. So I know that when we're going through here, we're going to be covering some things that we spent a great deal of time on. So I'm going to try to go back and get some areas that we did not hit when we went through this chapter, character by character. And particularly, what I want us to do with this study is to remember that we're studying this again because this is the section that's on the Bible Bow. And looking at that, I want to look at it from a Bible Bow study viewpoint more so than taking it, going back and looking at every character, which is something that we already did. And so, what I want to do, let me add something else to that. I also want to go and look at the verses in this chapter that talk about the whole goal of all of these men and women whose are listed in this chapter, the Hall of Fame of the Faithful. So while we have a lot of people not yet here, it looks like I'm going to go ahead and look at our text. So I'm going to type this into our chat, Hebrews 11. That's where we're going to look at. And of course, since we're doing this for the Bible Bow, I'm going to be looking at the New King James version of this chapter. Now, faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. For by it the elders obtained a good testimony. By faith we understand that the worlds were framed by the word of God, so that the things which are seen were not made of things which are visible. By faith Abel offered to God a more excellent sacrifice than Cain, through which he obtained witness that he was righteous, God testifying of his gifts, and through it he, being dead, still speaks. By faith Enoch was taken away, so that he did not see death, and was not found, because God had taken him. For before he was taken, he had this testimony, that he pleased God. But without faith it is impossible to please him. For he who comes to God must believe that he is, and that he is a rewarder of those who diligently seek him. By faith Noah, being divinely warned of things not yet seen, moved with godly fear, prepared an ark for the saving of his household, by which he condemned the world and became heir of the righteousness which is according to faith. By faith Abraham obeyed when he was called out to, I'm sorry. By faith Abraham obeyed when he was called to go out to the place which he would receive as an inheritance. And he went out not knowing where he was going. By faith he dwelt in the land of promise as in a foreign country, dwelling in tents with Isaac and Jacob, the heirs with him of the same promise. For he waited for the city which has foundations, whose builder and maker is God. By faith Sarah herself also received strength to conceive seed, and she bore a child when she was past the age, because she judged him faithful who had promised. Therefore from one man, and him as good as dead, were born as many as the stars of the sky in multitude, innumerable as the sand which is by the seashore. These all died in faith, not having received the promises, but having seen them afar off, were assured of them, embraced them, and confessed that they were strangers and pilgrims on the earth. For those who say such things declare plainly that they seek a homeland. And truly, if they had called to mind that country from which they had come out, they would have had opportunity to return. But now they desire a better, that is, a heavenly country. Therefore, God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he has prepared a city for them. By faith, Abraham, when he was tested, offered up Isaac, and he who had received the promises offered up his only begotten Son, of whom it was said, "In Isaac your seed shall be called," concluding that God was able to raise him up, even from the dead, from which he also received him in a figurative sense. By faith, Isaac blessed Jacob and Esau concerning things to come. By faith, Jacob, when he was dying, blessed each of the sons of Joseph and worshipped, leaning on the top of his staff. By faith, Joseph, when he was dying, made mention of the departure of the children of Israel and gave instructions concerning his bones. By faith, Moses, when he was born, was hidden 3 months by his parents because they saw he was a beautiful child and they were not afraid of the king's command. By faith, Moses, when he became of age, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, choosing rather to suffer affliction with the people of God than to enjoy the passing pleasures of sin, esteeming the reproach of Christ greater riches than the treasures in Egypt, for he looked to the reward. By faith he forsook Egypt, not fearing the wrath of the king, for he endured as seeing him who is invisible. By faith he kept the Passover and the sprinkling of blood, lest he who destroyed the firstborn should touch them. By faith they passed through the Red Sea as by dry land, whereas the Egyptians attempting to do so were drowned. By faith the walls of Jericho fell down after they were encircled for 7 days. By faith the harlot Rahab did not perish with those who did not believe when she had received the spies with peace. And what more shall I say? For the time would fail me to tell of Gideon and Barak and Samson and Jephthah, also of David and Samuel and the prophets, who through faith subdued kingdoms, worked righteousness, obtained promises, stopped the mouths of lions, quenched the violence of fire, escaped the edge of the sword, out of weakness were made strong, became valiant in battle, turned to flight the armies of the aliens. Women received their dead raised to life again. Others were tortured, not accepting deliverance that they might obtain a better resurrection. Still others had trial of mockings and scourgings, yes, and of chains and imprisonment. They were stoned, they were sawn in two, were tempted, were slain with the sword. They wandered about in sheepskins and goatskins, being destitute, afflicted, tormented, of whom the world was not worthy. They wandered, God having provided something better for us, that they should not be made that. Let me read that again. God having provided something better for us, that they should not be made perfect apart from us. Let's see if people are here. Okay, so we have Wendy and Elizabeth. Hello to you too. Good to have you with us. And we have more in the, I don't know what to call it, audience box, I guess, where you see how many are watching. But I want to look at this chapter 11 of Hebrews and looking at it again from a Bible Bow viewpoint. Since we've looked at these verses just in such detail, I imagine that when we take the Bible Bow, I've noticed when we take it that the questions that come up are usually questions from verses that are verses that kind of stand out, verses that get quoted a lot in sermons because they, of course, every verse in the Bible has meaning to us, but some do ring chords more so with us than others. And I want to look at some of these that I think will be on this. Now, faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. I believe if anything we should remember from Hebrews 11, it would be verse 1. Here is a grand definition of faith. Not that it's the only definition of faith, but it tells us what faith is. And looking at at this, faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not we don't have. We say faith ends in sight. Well, that's true. That's very true. Oh, and I see Jessica and Mike Deal are here. Good to have y'all. Hey, great to have y'all. We are talking about Hebrews 11. Faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. You know, I like to tell my opinions and things like that. I mentioned this definition. You know, you believe something until it's proven to you to be a fact. Now, faith is the substance of things hoped for. Now, if it's something that you hope for, then it's not something that you have. I don't have faith that there is a city named Washington, D.C. I did hope to see it one day. I went to see it one day. And now that faith is gone because it turned into sight. Faith ends in sight or in experience. It's the evidence of things that are not seen, though. It's the substance of things hoped for. Some have said the assurance of things hoped for, being assured of, or the realization of things hoped for. But there's evidence of it. You know, I could hope all I want that there would be a pot of gold at the end of a rainbow. And that would be something I could hope for, but it wouldn't fit faith, because faith is also the evidence of things not seen. So let me go back to my definition and my illustration here about Washington, D.C. I believed that there was a Washington, D.C. because I had evidence of it. I had studied it in school. I had seen it on television. I had read books about it, and seen it on maps, and all kinds of evidences came my way to say to me, to prove to me, there is a city that is called Washington, D.C. It is our nation's capital, and I've heard all kinds of things about it. I had heard all kinds of things about it. I mean, like how beautiful it was and things like that. When I went there, the faith wasn't needed anymore. And that is a lot of what we're seeing in Hebrews chapter 11. The faith that these people had, they would not need now, because they've gone to that city that's prepared for them. Now, I want to go down from verse 1 all the way down to verse 15. Let's go verse 13. These all died in faith, not having received the promises, but having seen them afar off, were assured of them, embraced them, and confessed that they were strangers and pilgrims on the earth. For those who say such things declare plainly that they seek a homeland. Now, these people that died that we read about in this chapter, Hebrews chapter 11, these people that died never got their promise here on earth. Never did. I got a good, let me read this. It says, great to hear the word and so good to hear from you. We miss y'all dearly. Ashley also misses and loves y'all as well. And that is sweet as it can be. And we miss Ashley too. And hopefully we can see Ashley later. And going back to what I was saying, these people died hearing about the word, hearing the word about the promise here. And I'll get to that promise in just a minute. They were assured of it. And look, they embraced it. They confessed, we are strangers, we are pilgrims on the earth. We sing a song, I am a poor wayfaring stranger. Uh, there's a song, I don't know who sings it. We're uh, strangers, we are aliens, children of another world. Uh, I don't know who wrote that. That song is in the back of my memory somewhere way back there. Growing up, we are strangers, we are aliens, we are children from another world. Well, that's really true. We sing the song, "This world is not my home. I'm just a passing through. My treasures are laid up somewhere beyond the blue. I can't feel at home in this world anymore." A lot of songs about pilgrims. Here we are, but straying pilgrims. Here our path is often dim. All of these songs, a lot, excuse me, all of these songs here sing this sentiment that is expressed in verses 13, 14, 15, all of these verses here in Hebrews chapter 11. So what they're doing is this. Those who say such things declare plainly that they seek a homeland. And truly, and here's the thing, if they call to mind that country from which they come out, now Abraham came from Ur of the Chaldees. Terah took his son Abraham, his grandson Lot. Genesis 11:31. All these people, if they'd have got to thinking about where they came from, they would have had opportunity to return. If they would have called to mind, if they'd have dwelt on that, that's really what they wanted to do. Now, we watched a documentary the other day. There's one on YouTube. I forgot who put it out. It is a long documentary. You get a lot of information in it, but it is on Ur of the Chaldees, and this is Sumer, Sumer, the Sumerian civilization, where you had Ur and several other big cities, grand cities at one time that now are just desert, but at that time it was the place and the place to be. But salt deposits ruined the land gradually over time, and people had to move away from it. And so they could have returned to that land. And I think about this verse when I think about that documentary, verse 16. But now they desire a better, that is a heavenly country. We have better country here on the earth than what they would have returned to, because that civilization fell. The salt deposits that came when the rivers flooded, there's just enough salt to just make the land get less and less useful, to the extent now nobody wants it, and it's kind of a sad decline of a civilization. But if they'd have stayed there, they'd have had to have moved. And the people there, there's documentaries that tell about this. And this one that I watched told about how, they were taken captive. Some of them moved. Nobody's there now. But they desire this better country. And it's not a better country here on earth. It's a better country in heaven. They desire a heavenly country. Therefore, God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he has prepared a city for them. Now, I want to look at another. Let's go to 9 and 10, going back from one page to the other, compare it with this better country. Just a minute. By faith, let's go to 8. By faith, Abraham obeyed when he was called out to go to the place which he would receive as an inheritance. And he went out not knowing where he was going. By faith, he dwelt in the land of promise as in a foreign country, dwelling in tents with Isaac and Jacob, the heirs with him of the same promise. For he waited for the city which has foundations, whose builder and maker is God. Here we have the song about in that bright city, the white city. Here, whose builder and maker is God. There's a holy and beautiful city. But here he waited for the city which has foundations, whose builder and maker is God. Now, the land, and here they're dwelling in tents. And so I want to look at a few points here. Uh, First off, what I want to look at is the tent and the city. Okay, so let's compare and contrast the tent that we have versus the city that we will have. Okay, and the first thing that I want to say is this: the tent. Just look at the contrast, uh, and that's the first thing I want to do. Look at the contrast. Now, I don't know how many we have, but when you think about a tent, I don't see who would like to put something here. One of the biggest differences in a tent and a stationary building is that a tent can be what a tent can be. I tell you what, uh, Cookie is getting so good. She literally answered my question before I asked it. Oh wow, that is awesome. The the tent. That's funny. I was literally typing this question and up popped the answer. The tent is temporary. The tent can be moved. But look at the city. Look at this contrast. The city is permanent. Now we have here, and we even have the Apostle Paul talking about living in this tabernacle, living talking about possessing this vessel. But the tent is in one place in the morning, and it may be miles away at night. And the city always remains in the same place. So here, there has to be, of course, an altogether different kind of occupation and interest for the one who lives in tents, especially in this day and time, versus the one who dwells in cities. People who lived in a lot of times were shepherds. We call them nomads. They travel from one place to the other, nomadic groups, and they had to be able to set up their tent where they got to, perhaps because they're feeding their livestock. And people in the city, of course, could not do that because you build a building and the grass then is eaten all around it. Well, that wouldn't work, of course. You don't want to go build buildings every time you go somewhere. And looking at this, though, you would see sometimes, and even back then and even now, you would see the father doing something, but the next generation wanting to do something different. We see that a great deal today. It's rare that it's more rare that sons and daughters do follow the professions of their parents. But back then, you had a lot of times that was exactly all they knew, and so that's what they would do. But sometimes in the Bible, you'll see the father dwelling in tents, the children in cities. Now, if you're living in a tent, you should not have any particular interest in the land where you happen to be at that time. And if it supplies the land, if the land supplies what he wants or needs for that passing day, everything he has, all his are cared for. But as someone who has a house in that land, now he has to have a deep interest in the land and getting it ready and the prosperity and all of it. You have these different things, these contrasts, and you have him living in tents, Isaac living in tents, Jacob living in tents until he comes down to the land of Goshen, and that land was given to them. That was not to be their land promise, though. They stayed there a while, but since we have the Passover, people putting lamb's blood over the doorposts, it's safe to assume that they had houses of some kind for the most part by that time. But they moved out of Egypt, were brought out of Egypt, and lived in tents then again for 40 years. And so the next generation, though, so you went from tent to building tent because of the disobedience, but then that next generation was moved into a land that had houses they did not build, vineyards they did not plant, very luxurious for them. They moved right in. Now, we sing a song. I have a mansion just over top of, a mansion built for me and all. And even though the meaning of that is different, I know that the word mansion, when Jesus says in my Father's house are many mansions, it literally means rooms. Whatever the structure we are allotted in eternity, it's not built by us. And so we sing a home not made with hands. And it's okay because we know we don't have to build it. It'll be okay whatever it is. But looking at this, you see a contrast in these people. They dwelled in tents. They looked not for being in a land one day, even their posterity being in land one day. They looked to be in that place. So even though verse 13, these all died in faith, not having received the promises, but having seen them afar off, were assured of them. And here they didn't see them, but in their faith, in their mind, they had faith. They knew that it was going to happen. We look at these promises that were given to them, and we see that it was not just for them. Now let's go down to verse 39 and then verse 40. And all these, having obtained a good testimony through faith, did not receive the promise, God having provided something better for, now look at this, us. Now the Hebrews writer wrote this, and this is a verse that I would want, if I were doing the Bible bow, I would want here, God having provided something better for us, that they should not be made perfect apart from us. We're getting a promise too. If you're a Christian, you have the promise. You have the promise of a home not made with hands, whose builder and maker is God. And so this promise is not just to them, it's to us. And that's something very important, I believe. I believe it's something that we need to look at. Now, let's go by each of these characters. And again, if you're listening to this for Bible Bow, it will be a good idea to take notes of who these characters are. We start with verse 4, way at the beginning here with Abel, who made a more excellent sacrifice than Cain. Here are the two brothers, Cain and Abel. Abel had a more excellent sacrifice than Cain. The next character you see in verse 5 is Enoch, who was taken away so that he did not see death. If you did not understand when it said Enoch walked with God and he was not, it is explained clearly way over here near the end of the Bible in Hebrews chapter 11, verse 5. By faith, Enoch was taken away so that he did not see death and was not found. Maybe here's the what was called the etymology, the word meaning behind here was not. You couldn't find him anywhere. He was nowhere to be found. he was taken so that he did not see death, because God had taken him. All right. So you have Abel, and then Enoch. Verse 7, you have Noah. Noah. And all this, the great flood that destroyed the world. He was divinely warned of things not yet seen, moved with godly fear. And not only did he move his faith, and we go to James chapter 2, faith without works is dead. He prepared an ark for the saving of his household. He got up here and got to work. All right, now, next character, Abraham. Next character is his wife, Sarah. She also was a woman of faith. Abraham here, who dwelling in tents with Isaac and Jacob, the heirs with him of the same promise. It was to be him and his family, this branch of his family. He had other sons by Keturah, and he had another son by Hagar, Ishmael. He had here many heirs, and he waited, though, for the city that has foundations, which has foundations, whose builder and maker is God. And so Sarah had faith. She received strength to conceive seed. This, he's listed again. When he was tested, offered up Isaac. Or here's something else with Abraham. Isaac, and he received the promises, offered up his only begotten son. And we see that phrase in John 3:16, for God, who gave us his only begotten son. And God was able to raise him up even from the dead. And that's what God did with his son. Isaac was not killed, so in a way, Abraham got him back. But Jesus, in a literal sense, he was God's only begotten son who was raised from the dead, literally killed, literally rose from the dead. Then you have Isaac, who blessed Jacob and Esau concerning things to come. And I think it's interesting in verse 20, Jacob and Esau, two interesting things. Esau was the oldest, and yet we still say Jacob and Esau, as was promised that the younger would rule over the younger. I'm sorry, the younger would rule the older. And Jacob and Esau, usually how I've always heard this and said this, and here the Hebrews writer says he blessed Jacob and Esau. Of course, we also know that story, that was the order in which they were blessed. Isaac blessed Jacob first because he came in pretending to be Esau. But then Esau was the one who sold his birthright for a pot of lentils. You know, and I'm just going to tell you, and this is just a side note, I've had lentils before, and I don't know of a single thing I've inherited I'd trade for that bowl of lentils. I just did not like them at all. I've been blessed with people who've loved me and who've left me, and I'm thankful for that. I know they are earthly possessions. The fact that I have them now is proof enough that they're not going to be mine forever, because who had them before me is gone, and one day I'm going to be gone. But no thing that I have inherited to me is worth trading over a pot of lentils. I've tried them. I don't know. I don't know how good a cook Jacob was, but anyway, nothing. Anyway, Esau was hungry. Maybe he was hungry, and I've not. Maybe I'm not as hungry as Esau was too. I have to consider that. I don't know how hungry he was, but that's still a very foolish, foolish, foolish thing to do. But Esau acted very foolishly there, and he traded his birthright for this pot of lentils, and then Jacob, to seal the deal, we could say, dressed as Esau, went and tricked his father, deceived him. Now Jacob himself paid for that dearly, and we see in verse 21 There's a lot of years and a lot of drama when we go back to what really happened between verses 20 and 21 there in Genesis. By faith, Isaac blessed Jacob and Esau concerning things to come. By faith, Jacob, when he was dying, blessed each of the sons of Joseph and worshiped leaning on the top of his staff. A lot of drama, as you know, happened between these two verses. Jacob tricked Isaac. His mother was in on it. And then he had to flee. It was the beginning of sorrows for him. And I don't know who had more sorrows, Jacob or David, if you counted them up. Both of them had much sorrow. And both of them, David killed Uriah, and the sword would never leave his house. He had a lot of trouble too. But Jacob was tricked by Laban. You can read of how when he ran away from him, how he told him he changed his wages all these many times, and just tricked him with Rachel and Leah, and then his own sons deceived him and told him that Joseph had been killed. They deceived him. He just lived a life of being deceived, falling for it each time. But just like how that had to have hurt his father. His father never saw him, and of course, his father was blind, but that was his last appearance before him, and that was very sad. So anyway, I believe that some of these may be on here. I just want you to notice it is Jacob and Esau, and then we have another character, verse 22, Joseph. And then you have Moses. And then you have they, which is the children of Israel, but they're not mentioned. And then the walls of Jericho and all of these things. Then you have another woman, Rahab, by faith, the harlot Rahab. And then you have just a list in verse 32 of people that the writer did not have time to tell about. Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, David, Samuel, and then it ends with the prophets. Now, we could still be studying on Hebrews 11 if I had taken every one of the prophets and did a night on them. But I didn't do that on purpose. I wanted to move on and learn other things. But these things that they did here, if I were wanting to study for the Bible Bowl, I definitely want to know, want the students to know that they subdued kingdoms, they worked righteousness, they obtained promises, they stopped the mouths of lions, they quenched the violence of fire, they escaped the edge of the sword, and these are very wonderful things, and full of wonder, full of awe that they did. Out of meek, but then you see what they did. Out of weakness were made strong, became valiant in battle, turned to flight the armies of the aliens. Now, let me say here, because especially with children, when you're studying with children, the word aliens, of course, grabs their attention because they want to ask, does this really mean someone from another planet? No, it doesn't. It means people from another country. And you'll see it used especially in the King James Version. An alien was not an extraterrestrial. It was not a person or a being from another planet. It was just somebody from another country. And then women received their dead raised to life again. And then you have a list of persecutions, tortured. But look at this, not accepting deliverance, not giving in. If it meant to be tortured for God, that was fine. Trial of mockings, being mocked, being made fun of, even on a trial basis, a trial where you should be in front of a court of justice whose job is to keep order in the country and make sure things are done justly. A mockery of a trial such as what Jesus had, but even a trial of mockings where, uh, you know, many times they were brought to court, and that could be what it's talking about here. It could also be just something that is trying with people mocking you. Neither one is to be preferred. That a way of life or something you want to endure, but people did it. What about scourgings where they were whipped? Verse 36. And not only that, chains, put in chains. Can you imagine how heavy and how horrible it would be to have chains? You could not just walk around not being free. Imprisonment, being imprisoned, just a horrible, horrible thing to have. What about they were stoned? Now, this was a form of execution that was meant for the unjust, the breakers of the law, certain laws only. But here they were stoning righteous people. Of course, we know Stephen was in this number. We think of immediately the stoning of Stephen. What about this? They were sown into, and some people believe this is referring to Isaiah, that he might not have been the only one. Sown into, TWO here, into two pieces. And then you see here a very dangerous thing, were tempted. Now, temptation gets you because of several things. Number one, it immediately takes you away from God, puts you on the side of the devil when you give in to the temptation. And so the temptation is there. That we read, if they call to mind that former country of which they came out, they've had opportunity to return. It'd be dangerous for them to be tempted. They were tempted. And just like Satan with Eve, you will not die. Oh no. It's like Satan with Jesus. Command these stones to be made bread. Now, they were also slain with the sword, a horrible death, to be cut into your body with a sword. They wandered about in sheepskins and goatskins, being destitute. Look at this, in need here. Not the preferred clothing of the day, even though we like to think of them living in the old days in sheepskins and goatskins, not necessarily the desired clothing. They wandered about in this, being destitute. They were in need. This is a picture of someone being poor. Look, afflicted. Your afflictions, things that hurt you, tormented. Tormented by what? Well, of course, other people. And sometimes things that torment you could be things as simple as the weather, a physical condition that's an ailment of some kind. All of these things, of whom the world was not worthy. And then he goes to say they wandered in deserts and mountains, in dens and caves of the earth. All these persecutions that they went through. Here they did this so that we wouldn't have to. We're still going to receive the same promise. They did this for their posterity. They did this. I'm not saying that we'll never have to endure some of these, but to the extent that some of them did, I don't believe that we will, at least. I pray that we won't have to. If we are, I hope that we will come through as good as they did, not accepting deliverance and obtaining a good testimony, even though we yet have not received our promise either. And so here we have this picture of these righteous people suffering at the hands of the wicked. And yet it didn't bother them because they had faith. Their faith was so strong. So look at this. We have again, came back and received the land promise. Looking, of course, to a time that they would be totally permanent, totally stationary. Having this tent here being temporary, and the permanent one being that one from God. And so, look, let me give you another verse to look at. 2 Corinthians chapter 5 and verse 1. Let me get to that right quickly, please. 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 1. For we know that if our earthly house, this heavens, and so we again look at this tent, this body as a tent, and go through the resurrection when we rise up ourselves. According to 1 Corinthians chapter 15, studied this not too long ago, that we will have a new body and a new life there in eternity. And so, looking at these characters, looking at what they did, what they had, I definitely believe that for our Bible Bowl team's sake, uh, look at these and put a blank where the names are and know where they are. So, for example, by faith, blank offered to God a more sacrifice than Cain. Of course, we should know that would be Abel. By faith, blank was taken away so that he did not see death. We can all study that. We did have an adult Bible Bowl. So uh, that would be a good thing for us all to study. So, anyway, patience having its perfect work. Patience having its perfect work. We hear that said every once in a while. Definitely something that we need to be patient and wait for. Uh, here, here were these people who definitely were learning to be patient, and God had to be patient with them sometimes. Especially when we read about the people who walked around tearing down the walls of. Well, let's go to the people before they tore down the walls of Jericho. Let's look at the people. Those were the people that really tried God's patience, and yet He was patient enough. He didn't just annihilate them there, even though He told Moses He could. He didn't, and that's just something a tribute to the love of our God. So, anyway, this is our lesson for the evening, and I appreciate you listening in. I appreciate the comments. I appreciate the people watching. Thank you for the like, whoever did that. Thank you very much. And it's just great to see everybody again. A blessing to have our friends raising the deals. Good to have them with us today. And uh, temporary. This says, okay, all right. So I want to say thank you for coming to everybody. And Lord willing, we will stream again on YouTube at 2 o'clock Sunday afternoon. And I want to say another thing. I got so many sweet, sweet, sweet letters and cards and texts and Facebook messages, all kinds of things for my birthday yesterday. Yes, it's true. I did turn 50 yesterday. But I just want to tell you all thank you for that. I don't know if I could get around to everybody. I literally got so many, and I appreciate that. And I send my love out to you all. You are the best people in the world to be with, to work with, to worship with, to be kin to, be friends with, to all these things. I love you all dearly. You do and mean so much to me. Do a lot for me, and I just hope that I can live and repay and deserve the love you give me. I'm going to try my best. We're supposed to not outdo one another except for in love. So I've got some returning to do, I tell you. I love you all. And until next time, I want to say good night to everybody and have a good evening. So I'm typing it out. Good night, everybody. And until next time, you have a good night, and may God bless you richly. Rich, rich, richly. Good night.